All right, welcome everyone. Hope you all are doing well. Interesting, my stylus just wandered off. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. We are on the 7th Torah portion. So that's pretty exciting. I think a kitty cat may have attacked my stylus. We're in the 7th Torah portion in our triennial cycle. This is pretty exciting. For anyone who might be listening in for the first time, with this last Shemitah cycle, there's my stylus, Hashem, we decided to go with the it's called the ancient Palestinian cycle. But that's just because the land of Israel was oftentimes, by scholars, still today called Palestine or Palestinian. This just means that not the Jews who were in diaspora, but the Jews who lived in the land of Israel. It was simply renamed Palestine, Philistia, by the Romans as an insult to Jews as kind of a punishment, right? And so, of course, we are the Palestinians. We are the native Palestinians. The term has become obfuscated by the king of confusion in the last several decades. Anyway, let's start with a prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, Toda Lecha, Toda Lecha lekol asher natata lanu Adonai. Bi Adonai hayom hazeh tishlach la et ruach hakodesh aleinu. אתה יודע כי יש לי עכשיו לב כבד, אבל אני רוצה רק לדבר את הדברים האלה שיש לי, אם אתה רוצה את זה. כן יהי רצון כי הקהל, כי יהיה להם גם דברים טובים בעיניך. תודה לך לכל אדוני, תודה לך לשבת, וגם תודה לך לתורתך. Okay, so here we go. The Torah portion is called Say min-hateyvah. Get out! Get out! Out of the ark! That's if we had Arnold Schwarzenegger telling us to get out. So say, it's a command form from Yatsa, to go out, to leave. It's kind of like saying Exodus from the ark. And it's in the singular form, so God is speaking specifically to Noach. Yes, Yehoshua, there's a rooster outside. My neighbor, I'm not sure if he owns the land or squatting or whatever, but he has a plethora of hens, and he's not the only one with roosters. They're all over the place. And roosters, you should know, roosters in the Philippines have no concept of time. So they like to go off at 2 a.m. at night, 4 a.m. in the morning, sunlight, no sunlight, who cares? I got a voice, let's do it. Right now, one of my neighbors is also burning trash, and the wind is blowing it into the basement here. So if you hear me coughing more than usual, I hit mute already to protect you from that. But yeah, between the roosters and the trash, it seems like 24/7 trash is burning. Because we're in a nice area. Well, by nice I mean it's away from the main city, so there should be less pollution. So people chip in to make sure there's still pollution. Baruch Hashem. God sees. God sees. So the Torah portion today, yeah, they crow around the clock, Janine says. They crow around the clock. It's true. And the dogs bark. I don't know if you guys have noticed, sometimes when I retouch these drashot before posting them for our premieres throughout the week, by the way, not so many of you attend. It's okay if you don't want to, but I've been trying to have these kind of live premieres where the drash has been broken up into 3 or 4 pieces, manageable, like 19 minutes, sometimes 30, but trying not to go any longer than that whenever possible. Usually like 20 is kind of the goal. And it goes live on YouTube, and I'm there commenting in the chats, and you guys can interact with me. Some of you have shown up. I appreciate it. Again, it's if you're interested in really processing the nuggets that were in the little chunks of the teachings, that's kind of a good thing we're doing throughout the week, I think. And some of you might have noticed in the retouchers, sometimes when a rooster crows, I put a little animated rooster crowing to make it look like it's intentional. Or when a dog barks, sometimes there'll be a little cartoon dog barking. Not always, but sometimes I don't have the time. But anyway, Janine says, reminds me of kefa. Yes. Yeah, it's hard not in Greek, alektor. I just mentioned it because it's such a weird word, alektor. It sounds like, I don't know, it makes me think of like Hannibal the Cannibal, alektor. It's such a strange. Anyway, the Torah portion is Genesis chapter 8, verse 15 through chapter 9, verse 17. So about one chapter. You should be able to read that pretty quickly and process on it. Dr. Miller from Matsati.com is also doing these triennial readings. He's a chavruta of mine, and he recommended we made a reading plan. If any of you are interested, to read it Sunday through Friday, right? Read it every day, because it's such a short thing, the triennial cycle. And when you read through it many times, it's funny. The first time might take 5 minutes, and then it's 3 minutes, and it's 2 minutes, and then you realize you should slow down again and chew on things and submit. But when you go through, each time you'll see something new, even on these small Hebrew parshiot. You'll still see something. And it's really nice. Anyway, I hope you guys will consider doing that. I used to do a aliyah a day, right? When we did the yearly Torah portions, because that was pretty manageable also to do one aliyah, right? Although sometimes an aliyah in the normal yearly Torah portion can be longer than a Hebrew pareshah in the triennial cycle, the so-called Palestinian cycle. So there's the reading. The haftarah is Isaiah 42 verse 7, and I have it in here. I'm going just through verse 9 because there's a big pay after that, and it really seemed to fit. But you could keep reading further. It's recommended around 10 verses or so, and you end on a happy note, yeah, with haftarah. But it's amazing. These triennial haftarot, they really do match up in context and in theme with the Torah portion. It just, I'm starting to think that the annual cycle was just some kind of a compromise just to get through in a year so people wouldn't forget things, perhaps. So, by the way, it's fine if you also like to do the annual cycle. Sometimes people, they ask me questions throughout the week that are related to stuff we've covered in the annual cycle. So please remember, we have that other YouTube page if you want to watch last year's Hebrew drashot about the annual Torah portions. Feel free. The more Torah study, the better. It's great to have two different cycles. When I have the time and I'm studying a certain book or books in the Bible, I usually like to set a reading plan for myself, and then I like to have a trailing reading plan, right? So what that means is I go through first, say it takes 3 months to complete some deep study, all right? Just as an example. So about 2 months into it, I like to start a rereading from the beginning again in sync, right? So I might be 2/3 in, the other one starts over at the beginning again. So that this is useful if you have the time to do that, so that your mind doesn't lapse. The things that you just learned that are fresh in your memory, that are in like recent memory, you don't lose them. If you hit it again with another pass, you can lock in and really get it. Yehoshua says, I'm doing both, doing the annual cycle weekly to keep up with Kalal Yisrael, and doing triennial in Aramaic together with you. Oh, that's great. Right. That's, yeah, Yehoshua is another chavruta. And actually, we're doing this in our group. Yeah, that's nice. Or the Aramaic, that's something. Yeah, Dr. Miller is doing also the Aramaic every day, right? So he's doing the Hebrew and the Aramaic, and onkelos, not Yonatan or Yerushalmi. And I'm kind of trying to do that, not every day, but I'm trying to go through the Aramaic at least once and the Greek at least once, which again is doable because it's such a short chunk, right? So yeah, that's great. That's a great spirit of leqach, Hebrew leqach, it's called. This is deep study, or keeping yourself in Torah study. Leqach, it comes from the root lakach, which is to take. So it's kind of like your takeaway, right? The takeaway from your studies. That's good. And when Yehoshua mentions Hebrew Kalal Yisrael, this means like standing with Israel. It's like for the sake of all of Israel. Sometimes it's worth doing something for the sake of all of Israel. So for example, in my own life, I don't I don't keep all of the Orthodox interpretations for mitzvot, right? Like all of the way that they traditionally interpret to keep a mitzvah. But when I'm in the land of Israel, I try to, right? For the sake of Kalal Yisrael, right? So to kind of not be, making a Hebrew michshol, a stumbling block for brothers. And why come off as arrogant or something too? So, yeah, very nice. All right, so let's look at the Masorah. Let's see what our old Masoretic text shows us where our Torah portion is today. You guys know I like to do that. I like to show you. So here we have it. You see this? Here's our samech, and it's interesting. Today he's got this kind of thanks for the smoke, neighbor. So it's got this little, it looks like a crown or something like that. And I do not know what that is. So if anybody knows what that is or why it's embellished this way, usually we have like a sideways comments indicating. So yeah, I find that interesting. In my old biblia sacra, it was a samech, and it usually had like a segol on top, right? Biblia sacra, it's a complete Bible. So it's the Hebrew text and the Greek all together, right? So the Greek apostolic writings, and both are critical editions, and yeah, it's in a single volume. So I don't know why theirs was different either. Okay, thanks for the comment, though. So there it is, and you can see we have our Torah portion starts. וידבר אלוהים el Noach לאמור. Then God spoke to Noach, saying, Say min-hateyvah. So there's the name of our Torah portion. Get out from the ark. Get out from the chest. And you'll notice we have a whole verse before the name of the Torah portion. That's normal. That also happens in normal Torah portions. And but there you have it. This is over 1,000-year-old document. This is what's stored over in St. Petersburg, Russia. You can get a bit of the running comments on the bottom. Right, so let's get started. Chapter 8, verse 15. וידבר אלוהים. Then God spoke. Now it seems like this is quite mundane, right? Then God spoke. It seems like this is something you would expect to see all over the place, but it turns out in the Masoretic text that we have notes that tell us this only occurs 3 times in the entire Bible. This phrase, וידבר אלוהים. It's only 3 times. So that's the Masorah gives us that note. So let's look at those other places. Once it's here. Once is in Exodus chapter 6, verse 2. And there it says, וידבר אלוהים. Then God spoke El Moshe unto Moses. Vayomer elav ani Adonai. And he said unto him, I am Hashem. So that's interesting. So quite a prominent personal moment. Remember, when something only occurs a handful of times in the Bible, our sages understand this to be significant. That's why this kind of notation is in the Masoretic text in the first place. It's why they took the time to note it. And this is the Bible we're talking about. This is the traditional Bible. Has these kinds of notes in it. It's just they don't make it into translation usually. The next place, the only other place where this phrase occurs in the Bible is in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. I've lost my mouse. There it is. And let's see what it says. In the Hebrew, וידבר אלוהים, then God spoke, et kol hadvarim ha'eli, all of these things, or all of these words, lemor. So this is, of course, just before the 10 Commandments. So let's kind of use these 3 points to triangulate the feeling of the words here, the feeling that the emotions that this can elicit. So God uses this language in revealing the text to Moses in the place where he reveals his attribute of mercy to him. Yod, He, Vav, He, or Yod, He, Waw, He, as it actually was. Again, don't say the name. This is actually quite significant. So the text tells us, then Elohim spoke. And as I've shared with you before, our sages indicate that the word Elohim, when used to reference God, often has a nuance of justice or judgment, divine justice in the universe. Cosmic justice is associated with the term Elohim. It's fitting that some of the sages in some contexts would choose to translate this to mean judges when speaking about certain verses that they couldn't explain, where it seemed like it would be it wasn't God actually that was being referenced as the power in a certain situation. I disagree with this translation because there's no etymological support for it. None of the lexicons, other than those that are following this tradition, would ever call humans Elohim. But I could be wrong, and enough of the sages believe this that I think it's worth mentioning, right? This is just my opinion, that it does not mean judges. But it does fit in many places, especially if you do not embrace the divine council worldview, right? The view that God does ruling and judgments and actions of the cosmos with his family, with the created heavenly host, with some of them, with the Hebrew B'nai Elohim, sons of God. So here we have, that's Elohim. And in the same verse, God is revealing his aspect of mercy to Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, Ani Adonai, I am the name, right? So it's telling us that the just one is speaking to Moses, and then look, Vayomer, and he says this is a softer. Daber and Amah, the sages also tell us that Daber is harsher, a bit stricter, a bit stronger way of saying spoke, and Amar is a bit softer. So God, or Elohim, spoke to Moshe, now a bit softer, a bit more intimate, and he said to him, I am, and here's the name that encompasses his attributes of mercy. It's useful when praying for justice, a just action, to refer to Eloheinu as Elohim, to refer to our God, Hebrew Eloheinu. It's useful when pleading for mercy to call out to Adonai, understanding his merciful side. So that's interesting. So we have that rooted in Exodus chapter 6, verse 2. Let's look now at Exodus 20, verse 1. So here, we have the same phrase. Then Elohim spoke, and it's introducing what's called the Decalogue, right? The Ten Commandments, right? Which is a Suzerainty treaty between our God and our nation. It is a loving introduction to who he is, what he stands for, what he desires from us, and how we may obtain long life. The Ten Commandments. The other place is here, Genesis chapter 8, verse 15, where Elohim has already exercised his attribute of justice. He has judged mankind. He has judged the Nephalim. He has judged the creatures, which, as we learned in last week's study, many of the sages, and the Talmud records this thought in Tractate Sanhedrin, believe that the animals themselves have been corrupted by what had happened to nature. The actions of the fallen Elohim, the fallen sons of God, what they had done, this is not referenced by the sages, although there is one Midrash that talks about the angelic interference, right? So that's, some had it. We're kind of combining divine council worldview and our historical Jewish perspective on these things. And the Hebrew chamas, the injustice. Best to translate that as injustice, not necessarily violence in that context. The injustice that was prevalent in the whole world. So the injustice, the Hebrew chamas, caused Elohim, the divine aspect of God, to act. And now he has enacted his judgment, as painful as it was for him. And here we have our third connection. Exodus 6:2, where God reveals his attribute of mercy, his name, Yod-He, Waw-He, to Moses. Exodus 21, where God reveals his Ketubah, his marriage contract to Israel, the Ten Commandments. And here in Genesis 8:15, then Elohim spoke unto Noach, saying, and look, we have a softer Amar, again, softer. Here comes the salvation. Here comes the Yeshua, the salvation for not just Noach, but the entire world. All of the terrestrial animals are about to be saved. Even though the ark was a means of rescue, to cling too long to it, to remain in the ark would result in death. They have to come out. They've been in there for 1 year, remember. People can become agoraphobic if they remain in their houses for 1 year and don't ever go out, especially if it is fear that drove them into the house in the first place. Imagine hearing the screams, hearing the sounds of the crashing waves, the thunder, the terrible noises, the shaking, the seasickness, all of these things that would have happened to humans and animals in the ark for 1 year, for 12 months. And now the ark has rested. On Rosh Hashanah, God comes to Noach and he says, Hebrew, Tzei min-hateyvah, come out from the ark. Dr. Vera asks an interesting question. He says, the creatures that entered the ark, are they corrupt also? Thanks. Well, I think we can probably assume they were not, because the one who caused them to come to Noah, remember, Noah did not gather them. God brought them to Noah. So we must assume that God selected uncorrupted varieties. I could be wrong on that, but I think it's fair to make that assumption, don't you think? Since God is the one who's leading them there. Although you could counter that and say, well, what about the Midrash that says that Noah suspected his wife of being impregnated by one of the Nephalim? And there's some other writings that maybe one of his son's wives had been impregnated by the Nephalim, etc. But we could then come back on that and say, well, it's probably Noah, for the sake of Noah, for the sake of God's love for him, that his family was saved. They might not have been quite up to snuff. But then we have the other Midrash that says that at those, remember I shared the comment that the comment that the age of knowing good and evil, right? The age of accountability in those days was 100, not teenage years as it is traditionally in Jewish culture, right? So that Noah timed the age of his sons to be under 100 when the deluge came, so that they would not be judged for their actions. So even if there was some evil in them or something happening with their wives, they would be under the age of under the age of accountability. They didn't have their bar mitzvahs yet. Shimon asks, are there dinosaurs in the ark, Rabbi? Thank you. Yeah, that's a nice question. So, yeah, it's the question of dinosaurs is a bit enigmatic, right? So there we have the two views from Bible believers. One is the old earth view and the other is the young earth view, right? So those who believe in a young earth, i.e. on the order of magnitude of less than 10,000 years old, tend to believe that dinosaurs coexisted with humans. And there's a few interesting evidences, a human footprint instead of a dinosaur footprint, some of these other anecdotal evidences you might have seen out there. The other Bible-believing view is that of an old earth. And there's ways to approach both of these without saying that the scripture is wrong, right? The Bible really doesn't get into a whole lot of science stuff, and there's really not a whole lot of dinosaur stuff. Some people think that the stuff about Leviathan, his tail swings and, or Behemoth, there's these two large creatures, things are happening, trees are getting knocked down, etc. It's possible. It's possible. I'm of the view right now, but you can change my mind on it. This is just an opinion, since you asked, that the dinosaurs were part of one of these. Okay. There's actually, I'm a bit multiple personality disorder on this opinion, on this topic. Part of me thinks that maybe the dinosaurs were the result of interference from the sons of God, like other interference that wasn't recorded. I mean, if they were going to interfere with humanity, then why not also with the other animals, right? And so I wonder if this was interference on their part. And because of that, God decided to destroy them. And what's interesting about, I haven't read anything on this particular perspective. This is just my own opinion, my own idea, right? And so if God then decided to wipe out the dinosaurs because this was part of wiping out the Nephalim and the damage they had done, well, what's interesting is we have vast amounts of oil underneath the Earth's crust, right, at a certain level. And so, and it seems like it happened at about the same time that there was a mass extinctions, right? Masses of life died. The oil used to be living beings, right? Plants and animals and stuff like this. And so I think probably the oil thing happened as all of the organic material was crushed under the weight of the water, and then it was left there, and that in some places that became what we know as oil today. I don't know if you've ever seen the gas station Sinclair. I don't know if they're around anymore, but we used to have this one in the United States called Sinclair, and they had a brontosaurus as their symbol. Right? So it's almost common knowledge that the oil is from ages ago, right? That this is when it formed, and so it seemed like they were thinking maybe the dinosaurs are what composed the oil, the petroleum that we use today. The other opinion, the other thought I should say that I had was maybe they were part of these multiple creation events that God did, right? Remember, we have the Midrash that says that Hebrew HaKadosh Baruch Hu created and destroyed and kept on creating and destroying until he was pleased. So that perhaps the dinosaurs were one of these creation/destruction events, that he wasn't pleased with how things turned out with them. But I don't know. Chime in. Let me know what you think. I think I'm kind of liking my other idea that they were possibly the result of interference from the fallen sons of God. Nice question. If you did take dinosaurs, you could imagine babies, perhaps, right? Hatchlings, something like this. Nothing says that he took adults from all of the animals, right? I would imagine that all of the species would have been infants, something like this. Or, yeah. Okay, Yehoshua writes, actually, before I get to Yehoshua, someone follows up. Thank you, Rabbi. I have an atheist friend who asked me that, so just want to know you. Yeah, okay, it's a good question, but it's almost like, I have to say this to any atheist listening. This is not as clever as you think it is. Okay. I mean, there's religious answers for all of these things for a long time now. You don't really need any kind of extra creativity from me to get to these things. So the dinosaur thing, it's almost annoying to me when an atheist asks that question. By the way, no offense if you're just doing it, if you're really intellectually honest, just because it's really not that much of a problem when you think about it. The biblical text doesn't give us a lot of details about these things, right? Just like it doesn't say a lot about scientific things, because the focus is spiritual. It's spiritual. And while there is a lot of interesting information in the Bible that is confirmed by science, this is not the purpose. And this is really a lie that the devil has sold people for the last 60 years, I think. This concept of we have to hold the Bible up to the standard of modern science. Well, you know what? Every 50 years, modern science flip-flops, and what used to be accepted as clear fact becomes the laughingstock for anyone who believes it. It's really a situation of bullying a lot of times. Just like I was discussing with Dr. Vera and the Hebrew students for a while. We had a pretty in-depth discussion about how any scientist who is against Darwin's hypothesis of evolution, for scientific reasons, gets ostracized. They lose their jobs. It's politically incorrect for them. No matter how smart they are, no matter where their education is from, no matter what their position. If they even entertain it, despite peer-reviewed experiments articles, etc., it doesn't matter. For a lot of these people, atheism has become a religion. I'm not talking about your friend, by the way, the one of you who mentioned that. But it's one of those things that people cling so vehemently to because in their mind it gives them freedom to do whatever they want. But in actuality, it means they're slaves to their own animal instincts, ironically. Okay, Yehoshua says, so you're saying that this could have been an experiment? I wouldn't use that word. No. What I'm saying is that it might have been part of Hashem's process. Perhaps there was a purpose to it, right? Perhaps he, in those other iterations, perhaps he allowed his children to be part of the creation, and they messed up. Who knows? The Bible's silent on it. The only thing we have is, as I mentioned with you guys before, the very first letter in the Bible shows us that it was one of perhaps several iterations in a beginning. So because it's in a beginning, that opens up the door to all kinds of stuff. I wouldn't call it experiment. I mean, like I said, we really don't know. Maybe in those iterations of creating and destroying, like I said, he's letting his bnei Elohim, sons of God, do the work. And all right, you can't have sharks that are the size of skyscrapers. That's not going to work. Or, okay, you can't have these things running around with several rows of teeth that are going to eat the human who I really want to make, right? Or whatever. It could have really been, because we have this evidence that, creating and destroying, again, the process, again, that's just the Midrash, right? The creating and destroying. So you put whatever stock you will in the Midrash, Yehoshua. Yeah, it's a good question. I wouldn't go so far as to say he's experimenting, but it might not have happened that way. He might have had, maybe several beginnings were necessary to reach the point where he was able to create mankind. Maybe that was just what was necessary to make man in that way, right? Maybe he needed those other iterations. Yeah, I wouldn't think of it as an experiment. I don't know, that feels off to me. I mean, we don't really have examples, do we, in the text of God experimenting? I don't really think that's part of his character as the most omniscient being in the universe. Although I suppose it's possible. But I like your comment, though. It's good to think about. All right. So the dinosaur thing, I think there's a lot that we could think about this. But for now, I like the idea that that perhaps the sons of God corrupted things. And because we know that the flood, if any of you remember some of my sermons from a couple of years back, we were really heavy into the divine council thing and the giants, the Nephalim, all this kind of stuff. And if you remember those teachings, then you remember that the flood is not just about wiping out humanity. It's also about wiping out the Nephalim, right? It's also about stopping that. And then many of those beings that have passed on already that caused that are now in chains and gloomy darkness, as is mentioned in the book of Jude. They've been cast down to Tartarus and enchained. Okay, so nice. So this happens on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, which traditionally, well, Messianics for sure, we believe that this is when the Messiah will come back on a Rosh Hashanah event, with the shofars and the chatzatrot, Hebrew chatzatrot, they're like horn, like trumpets, kind of, the trumpets that the Levites would play, right? Brr, 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 announcing the coronation of a king. And so just as one tradition says that Adam Rishon was born on Rosh Hashanah, other tradition says it was the world that was created on Rosh Hashanah. I think the man creation makes more sense, so that our calendar starts from the birth of man, which also solves a bunch of issues if you're an old earther. If our calendar, our roughly 6,000 year calendar is starting with the birth of man, not the creation of the world, then we have Adam's birthday, and now we have a new chance for humanity with his descendant Noach and his family. And not only that, the entire group of terrestrial animals come out from the ark. It's from Rosh Hashanah. Hebrew, ata ve'ishtecha, you and your wife, uvanecha, and your sons, uneshevanecha, and the wives of your sons, itach, with you. You and your wife, this is interesting. In the Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin, page 108, we have this little discussion here. It says, the Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that it was prohibited for them to engage in intercourse while in the ark? So this is the view that the rabbis hold, that there was no human sex on the ark, right? It wasn't allowed, which makes sense. You really want a baby being born in that environment? They're there for a year, right? The Gemara answers, it is derived from that which is written, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons. And then we get, and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Genesis 6, verse 18. And the Talmud continues, and it is written, emerge from the ark, you and your wife. This is what we just read. They'd say, min-hateyvah, you and your wife. So you see, so wife now is listed before sons, and your sons wives with you. This is the verse we're looking at right now on the screen. And Rabbi Yochanan says, from here the sages derived and said that it was prohibited to engage in intercourse while in the ark, as when Noah and his family entered, the husbands and wives were listed separately, and when they emerged, the husbands were listed with their wives. Okay. When you check the texts, you'll find that Noah did not follow God's instructions precisely. As in verse 18, the Torah reports, I believe this is Sarna, I didn't put the reference there. I think this is, I'm not sure. Check. The Torah reports that Noah did not leave the ark at the same time as his wife, but he left in the company of his sons. According to an argument between Rabbi Nehemiah, okay, no, this is, I think this is Kimchi. Rabbi Nehemiah and Rabbi Yehuda, according to one, Noah was punished for not taking advantage of living with his wife again immediately. This is after he comes out of the ark. And siring more children by being debased and castrated in his wife's tent. So this is the punishment that's coming up. What Ham, his son Ham, is going to do to him. Right? He gets castrated. And Kimchi here is referring to the Midrash Breshit Rabbah 35:1. The other rabbi disagrees, claiming that he was rewarded, seeing that he proved more chaste than even commanded by not immediately indulging in sex with his wife, so that God spoke to both him and his children in Genesis 9, verse 1. But he does plant a vineyard, right?